Hello everyone, thank you so much for coming tonight. My name is Nathan Gracie. Tonight we're going to welcome Dr. Mcclure, Professor Emeritus of Urban Planning at the University of Kansas. He has spent decades researching and understanding housing supply, demand, and affordability. Dr. Mcclure holds a PhD in urban planning from the University of California, Berkeley, and a master's degree in city planning from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Tonight, Dr. Mcclure will discuss his findings, research, and expertise on housing. After his lecture, we'll have some time for questions. And this event has been organized and funded by a handful of individuals, including myself, Lori J., Marcy Schmidt, who's somewhere in here, and Terry Quattrero. So we are not representing any organization, neither is Dr. McClure. So I will turn it over to him, and please welcome Dr. McClure.
Thank you. We haven't done a sound check. How are we doing back there? Okay, good. Introductions like that are always embarrassing. First off, nobody ever uses the phrase doctor. All right, I'm Kirk. Just do that. But it is a great pleasure to be here. I was telling Lori on arrival, I've only had a chance to be in Bozeman once. My wife is a native of Boulder, Colorado. Doesn't like Boulder anymore because it's too big and too congested, and wants to move to Montana. And I'm a native Kansas Cityan, but I've lost all my relatives in Kansas City, so you can tell she's plotting for a place to live. And when we drove through Bozeman, you could see her say, college town, beautiful, and it's in Montana. Bozeman may yet be in my future, so I hope you guys continue to make this community as beautiful as it is. They asked me to give you a little more on my background and why I do the strange things that I do in housing. Housing is not a topic that a lot of people say, gee, I'm going to spend the rest of my career researching housing. But I was very lucky to have two professors during my undergraduate time. They didn't like each other. But one was an architect who believed everything was design, and the other was an economist who believed everything was numbers. And they both were specialties in housing. And so I got the best possible education because the two guys argued and debated, and they put up with me in between them. So I have been lucky enough to be in housing virtually all of my life. I have worked as a private developer, and that means I know the intricacies of putting deals together. I have been a mortgage underwriter. I used to work for the Massachusetts Housing Finance Agency. We did large-scale loans to large-scale rental properties in and around Boston. Banking is a tough side of this business, and it's important to know and understand banking when you're putting deals together. But the bulk of my time, and I've also worked for local governments and done a lot of consulting, but the bulk of my career was as a researcher for working at the University of Kansas. And also then I had a side gig with the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. And that gave me access to more data than an awful lot of people would normally get. I have all of HUD's data. So if a congressman said, hey, we want to know how is this program working in this type of community at helping this particular cohort find housing, I was one of the half dozen people they came to do that kind of work. So okay, I know that's a strange thing to enjoy, but I did enjoy it. And much to my wife's displeasure, when I retired from teaching. I'm afraid I never walked away from research. The research and the service work is just part of it, so I'm very glad to do it. I have enjoyed it and continue to do it. Well, the topic for this evening, and just so we have a quick, big overview, I'm going to go through some issues of where is the housing shortage, and I'll talk nationwide, but Bozeman, as you might suspect, behaves somewhat like the rest of the nation in some aspects and has many factors that are clearly different and calls upon the community to decide where does it want the housing stock of Bozeman to go in the future. So I'll spend a good deal of time on looking at Bozeman's numbers. I apologize for so many numbers. You know, economics works that way. They're numbers. So I know this is going to be a bit of a fire hose, but I will try to distill it down to the key takeaways. But the biggest problem is that right now our policies at the federal level and at many other local, state and local level is premised on the belief that there is a housing shortage. I can almost lay blame to that to some colleagues who work for Freddie Mac. Freddie Mac is one of those organizations when your bank makes you a mortgage loan, then the bank doesn't hold that money. Did everybody see It's a Wonderful Life a dozen times? Okay. I want you at Christmas time to go watch A Wonderful Life. The whole subplot of that movie is about why we need a secondary mortgage market like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. So with Old Man Potter and all that stuff. But here, Fannie Mae is the organization that buys those mortgages. They pool them. They are then sold back to investors in the form of Fannie Mae bonds. Great organization. Their economists put out a study that said, oh my God, we have a shortage of housing. The shortage is 3.8 million. That's a big number. Just so we get a sense of it, we build about 1 million units a year in the United States. So you're talking almost 4 years of production shortage. Also be aware that we don't normally have the capacity to increase our output a whole heck of a lot. So solving that problem isn't something where the president just turns a knob with the Federal Reserve or calls up Fannie Mae and says, hey, you know, make 3.8 million more loans than you usually. It doesn't work that way. So we have a lot of big policies. These policies are mistaken. And understand these policies are both sides of the political aisle. Under President Biden, you may recall he had the Build Back Better plan. A piece of that Build Back Better plan was very clearly based upon how do we solve the shortage of housing. And that's what prompted Alex and I to do this study. Obviously, we have a different president now. President Trump has his one big, beautiful bill. It has multiple housing components, and again, the notion is how do we build more so we can cut down the 3.8 million deficit. The difficulty with that is that this guides how we spend our scarce taxpayer dollars. There are many ways to spend it effectively. There are many ways to spend it ineffectively. At its most simple level, if we don't truly have a shortage of housing, spending taxpayer dollars to build housing we don't really need ain't the best use of our scarce taxpayer dollars. So if it's wrong, scarce resources will be misspent. All right. What do we mean by a shortage? I know that seems kind of silly, but the reality of it, there is no one definition of what is a shortage. The problems in measuring that are messy, but we've got a situation in the United States where it's understandable that people intuitively believe there's a shortage. What's the basic economics that we all understand? If something we want is short in supply, the price gets bid up. Housing is inarguably high priced right now. There's a heck of a big price tag almost everywhere in America, right? If we could, in fact, expand that supply, the belief is that the price would come down. That is the myth that Alex and I are trying to rectify. So, I'll hit to you one of the big findings. The time period matters. One of the most common metrics that economists watch to see if our housing markets are working properly is the ratio of house price to income in any given market. I'll just give you an old standard rule of thumb. Doesn't work anymore, but up until 1990, that ratio was constant in almost every metropolitan market in the United States. It varied some. San Francisco was the highest at 5.5. Honolulu was up there at 5. I often like to tell the joke that the guy in the office next to me for many, many years was from Odessa, Texas. Any of you have been through the desert town of Odessa? The only town in America that had a ratio below 1.0. Tells you a little bit something about, inexpensive to live there, but you gotta live there. The normal ratio was about 2.6, 2.7 over most years. Something happened in 98, 99. Not entirely clear why house prices took off. We had a housing bubble. 2000 to 2007, prices shot up enormously. Generally, economists believe that it shot up because we had made too much mortgage money available. Prices on mortgages had come down. We had created variable rate mortgages. We had graduated payment mortgages. We had all kinds of subprime mortgages. These probably never should have existed. Some of them are okay in very narrow circumstances. But for the most part, they appeal to people who are at the margin of affordability of buying a home. And so they get into one of these loans, their income doesn't rise, they get hit with an increase in their mortgage costs when their income hasn't risen. We have a lot of that. 2007, the mortgage market collapsed because of all those mortgages failing. That brought, because the mortgage markets collapsed, everybody, I'm big on movies, my brother wrote many books on movies. Did everybody see The Big Short? The movie, all right. The people that bundled all those mortgages together, not Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac in this case, but actually private label mortgage, they sold them to investors. And then the investors discovered, oh, wait a minute, you mean these mortgages aren't all safe? No. And it doesn't take 100% of them to fail to pull down an entire investment bundle. If you anticipated 2% failure rate in this set of mortgages, and it's 4, that is catastrophic. The entire deal fails. That's why we had the Great Recession. All right? So then back to the time period, the Freddie Mac study started with the time period after the Great Recession. And they said, as well, I'll show you in a minute correctly, we haven't built housing as fast as we're growing population since the Great Recession. That's true. What I'll show you also in a minute is they forgot to make note of from 2000 to 2007, we built houses much, much faster than we needed to. There's a lot of details to this, but its most simple level. The answer is that we had a surplus of housing left over from the bubble of 2000 to 2007. In fact, we didn't have a shortage during the recovery process later. All right, just a little of the specifics so you know what we did. Our basic question was to answer, are the claims correct that there's a housing shortage? And you'll have to trust me on this, bald-headed guys with funny growths on their upper lip don't lie, but Alex and I, one of my best friends, we do a lot of projects together. He lives in the upper west side of New York City. Everybody see You've Got Mail movie? Shot in his neighborhood. Okay, so next time you watch that park they're in, that's right outside his apartment house. All right, he lives in one of the hottest real estate markets in the United States. And years ago, apartments passed $1 million a piece. All right, then it went to garage spaces past $1 million. How do you know when the world is crazy? When a garage space sells for $1 million. That is patently ridiculous. We always get together and we talk often. I live in Kansas City, and many times when we talk together, I make the point, my colleague here lives in New York City, I live in the real world. And it's true. Kansas City is so close to the norm of markets in the United States that I have used that often as a standard. So what Alex and I started to do is we said, well, we really, where is the shortage? Is it evenly balanced? Is it in all price points? Is it in all regions? We started out with the honest assumption that the 10 hottest markets, and you can name them, Boston, New York, Washington, Miami, Seattle, Portland, San Francisco, San Diego, those hot markets. We thought that's where the shortage would be. And we wanted to see to what extent they varied. We got started on it, and we kept coming to the answer, we're not finding a shortage. And Alex is on the rent control board for the City of New York, and Alex has to get police guard to take him into those meetings. That's such a politically hot topic in New York City. For him to author a study saying there's no shortage in the greater New York area was going to be difficult. We kept trying to find ways we were wrong. We couldn't find an answer to that. So what we did is we said, all right, we're going to look at every market in the United States. Thank goodness they invented computers. But we looked at the 381 metropolitan areas. Basically, you're at the smaller end of the metropolitan areas, but Bozeman is Bozeman, the entire county is a metropolitan area, and Bozeman, the city, is the core city or principal city, is the phrase the Census Bureau uses. We also have 536 micropolitan areas. Again, just so you have a quick, 50,000 is about the line, but it's not absolute. It has to do with, whether you're in the labor shed of some other city. But usually when metro area is 50,000 or smaller, it's a micropolitan. Again, I'm from Kansas, so Salina, Kansas is a micropolitan area, cute little town. Kansas City is 2.5 million. It's one of the larger metropolitan areas, so that's how they get broken out. Our method was to compare growth of population, growth of housing units, and we were going to look at the period 2000 to 2020. We actually have extended the study a little bit to use more recent years to get 2021. 2024 data has just come out. But the journal we published in, Housing Policy Debate, is a great journal. In fact, I'm an associate editor on that one. But the methods people always beat you up, and they didn't like the way we were handling the American Community Survey data for the later years, so we stopped at 2020. But the bottom line is, of the 917 CBSAs, only 23 had a shortage, meaning the houses added to the stock were smaller than the growth of households and the population. All right? Is that the only way to measure a shortage? Of course not. We got a good friend who works at the Urban Institute, and he's got all sorts of other complex things. But Alex and I argue that for the most part, that's a conventional understanding of how you define a shortage. Here's the part that almost nobody believed when we first came out. 545 of these areas have a surplus. How do we define a surplus? If the metropolitan market has grown by more than 110% of the households, right? So if you added 5,000 households, 10% of that would be 500. If you've added more than 5,500 units during the study period, you're in a surplus condition. You have expanded the inventory of vacant units. That's not inherently a bad thing. Maybe you had too few vacant units before, but you moved into a surplus. About 209 metropolitan areas are balanced. In other words, they grew within that 0 to 10% figure. Sadly, a lot of people forget this, but we have 140 metropolitan areas in the United States that are declining. Example, New Orleans has never come back from Katrina. it lost 1/3 of its population. Huge out-migration to Houston. Houston never saw such an increase in population. But, it reached the point where it wasn't that people wouldn't move back. But again, back to my banking days, bankers wouldn't make loans. What's wrong? The darn city is below sea level. If a levy can fail once, it can fail a second time. And if you hold that mortgage, it isn't going to be repaid. All right? Just piece of trivia for you, 8% of the US population lives in non-metropolitan areas. So when people talk to you about the population in the rural area, be aware that it's it's 8%, it's 1 in 16 people. So it's not a huge number, and it doesn't behave the same in any two areas. Again, I'm from Kansas. We have 105 counties. 95 of the counties in the state of Kansas are declining in population. And you know what? Every time a family leaves one of those counties, they don't take their house with them. Boy, does that create a surplus. You know how hard it is to be a professor at KU, go out and talk to a mayor in like Russell, Kansas, and say, Mayor, get yourself a bulldozer. You need to take down that housing. You've got too much to keep your market balanced. Doesn't work. Okay. Complicated table. I'm sorry. I always make my students promise they'd never make a table with this many numbers, but I told them, oh, yes, sir.
Back to the prior slide, do you recall offhand which category Bozeman fit into?
Bozeman was just in the surplus. I'll show you that when we get to the Bozeman numbers. For what it's worth, to give you a better answer, the information on the vacancy that we are having on Bozeman, it says your vacancy inventory is growing. A good, balanced vacant inventory is a good thing. You don't want it too low, but you don't want it too high either. Again, that's the banker in me, but just want to alert you to that. I've got an awful lot of numbers here, and I'm sorry about that, but the how to put it, they're necessary. I didn't bring a little pointer, but I'll go through the organization. The key numbers you want to look for, top right-hand column. When is a market doing well? Ideally, you want your housing stock to grow fast enough that everybody who wants and can afford a home can have one. And those households will form if and only if the units are available. You have a healthy housing market, better housed population, if the household formation rate, that's the fancy phrase for what's the rate at which households form, is faster than the population growth. All right? Remember also that household formation is, don't you hate it when he talks like an economist, a constrained function. What does that mean? If the housing units aren't there, the population may grow, but the households can't form because you don't have enough units. The inventory of vacant units is too tight. You can't move on. So what you want, ideally, is a situation where stock is growing faster than household formation, which is growing faster than population. If you have a shortage, you don't have that, right? If you had a shortage, it would be suppressing household formation, which would not be keeping up with population growth. What we have in the United States, right-hand column, 2000 to 2020. And remember, that includes all the years of the bubble, first bubble, the Great Recession, then the recovery, pandemic. Well, actually, we stopped at 2020 there. I'll show you some post-pandemic numbers in just a second, but pretty much whole. Population grew by 0.8% per year. Just so everybody's aware, if you're not already, population growth in the United States is declining. I'm going to give you another little piece of trivia that everybody's like, that weird professor from Kansas City said it. we are probably only 40 years from peak population in the United States. In my profession of urban planning, real estate analysis, almost everything has been about growth. How do we figure out how to build for the new demand? In only 40 years, I won't be here. My daughter will be late in her career, but my granddaughters, they will be here, so I'm worried about this. We will start contracting. And no demographer that I can find sees any reason to believe American population, or indeed world population, will return to growth. We will hit our peak. Think about it. You're building houses today. What's the lifespan of an apartment building once you build it? Is it more than 40 years? Better be, because we lenders are loaning loans on the basis of it lasting that long. What we're building today will last to that peak. All right? 0.8% is where we are right now. It was 0.9% in the first decade of the 21st century. We were well over 1% in the 1980s. We're stepping down. The best demographer I know is a friend of mine, teaches at Harvard, and he has said, Kirk, we should anticipate 0.4 to 0.5% per year. And of course, he leaves open the ringer right now. Most of our growth since the 1980s have been, the growth has been caused by immigration. Anybody want to tell me where immigration is going to be over the next few years? It's obviously a political decision. It's not a market-based decision, so we don't know. It could go down even faster. There are some people who are saying that peak population could happen as early as the early 2040s. So not that far away. All right. The housing units grew by 1.0% nationwide. Now I realize we're talking tenths of a percent, but let's remember what we're talking about. We're talking about a nation with a population of 331 million. If you can read carefully that top number, it doesn't say 331, it says 323. For this kind of work, we always use the population that is in conventional housing. The so-called group quarters population, military bases, prisons, student dormitories, hospitals, the people who live, that's about 7 to 8 million a year. That number hasn't varied a whole lot, but they don't influence the housing market that much. So we like to follow that population, not in group quarters. Yeah.
Are you including mobile homes and manufactured homes?
They're always included, yeah. The Census Bureau has been doing that for a very long time. Just so you're aware, I don't know the incidence of mobile homes here in Montana, but the southeast is the far southeast is the only place where the mobile homes are big enough in numbers that it affects the calculation. And part of the problem with that is mobile homes don't last all that long. You know, you build a wood frame home. I lived in Boston for a decade. I lived a block away from Paul Revere's house, built in the 1600s, for God's sake. A house can last a long time if we decide we want it to last that long. Mobile homes, for a variety of reasons, they don't hang on all that well. At any rate, we have been building at a very rapid clip. Let me give you one of those quick pieces of trivia I always like to tell. During the housing bubble of 2000 to 2007, for every 100 new households in the United States, ideally, if you want the market to have a comfortable vacancy rate, you want to build 109 units. A little more than that, not a big deal, but you're increasing the inventory of vacant units more than you probably want to. Less than that means you're drawing down the vacancy rate. May or may not be a good thing, but you expect to fall within that number, all right? So I don't know how we know when we know a number is too big to believe, but for every 100 units, or 100 households, we wanted to build 109 units, we build over 165 housing units during that time period. If anybody said to you the American home building industry can't build that fast, well, yeah, they can. All you need to do is look back to 2000 to 2007 and they were building like gangbusters. Was that a good thing? No. And goodness knows the banks learned the hard way. It was not a good thing. We have settled down tremendously since then. We're down at least a fourth. We were building housing units at 1.3% during the first decade. We're down to 1.0% now. The next line is the 0.9%. What that is the rate of household formation. Remember, it can only be bigger than population growth if the housing stock is there. Well, of course, we have every reason to believe it's there. Up 1% compared to a 0.8% growth in population. So that means a lot of units are out there. Are they true in every market? Not necessarily. Yes, ma'am.
How do you deal with the fact that families have gotten so much smaller? Like I would expect a lot more household growth relative to population growth, just if most of the new people coming in, like you said, are, an immigrant coming, in, or, we have much smaller families, so shouldn't we have a lot more household growth relative to population growth?
Smaller families doesn't mean more families. It just means they're forming.
No, I'm just saying if the population, you're trying to say households grow by 0.9, and since that's bigger than 0.8, right? I think you're trying to say.
Yeah, well.
Like, I guess my concern is, like, I'm a family in Bozeman, a household. My household is me and my husband, and my daughter and her husband. And my daughter and her husband are in our household because it's so expensive, right? Oh, no,
Yeah.
I like them. But, so the number of households responds to how much housing there is. I think you were saying that. And so I'm just trying to put the numbers together.
Well, at least on this, that doesn't show, and where I'll show you is we're building at the price points that aren't gonna fit the entry
That's
level.
not my question. I mean, my
Okay.
understanding is the way you're saying where are places with shortages, you're trying to say where are places where the number of housing units grows faster than the number of households. And I'm just trying to
Almost
say,
all of them.
yeah, I'm just trying to say, that seems like a pretty weird way to define the shortage. And so my understanding is that when folks have looked at your methodology, they've said,
I'm
the
not
number of
suggesting,
households.
the number of young people living in mom's basement is huge.
Yeah,
But understand doubling up in the United States is a tiny, tiny fraction.
but is it a tiny fraction in areas with shortages? That's my question.
Yeah.
And is it gonna get missed in when you're
Yeah.
trying to count shortages?
No, I mean, don't get me wrong, it exists in New York City. People double up all the
And it
time.
exists in Bozeman, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, but what I'm getting at is, my job is to count the total. The number of doubled up families in Bozeman, probably a few dozen.
Well, I'm just saying that the people who have critiqued your work,
Yeah.
it's been from this perspective of you're not counting doubling up. And
Well,
so you're
I'm
missing
counting
a
it.
lot of shortage.
I'm counting it in the sense that I check, the Census Bureau does a close job of monitoring what they would define as overcrowding. Another little piece of housing, I'm gonna make you guys into accomplished housing economists by the end of it. Overcrowding in most of the world is defined as more than 2 people per room. That is non-existent in the United States. The Census Bureau has changed overcrowding in the United States to more than 1 people per room. And we don't count kitchens and bathrooms. So living rooms, bedrooms, dens, so forth. If you have more than 1 person per habitable room, not counting bathroom, that's considered overcrowding. That has become so minor a problem in the United States that we no longer really worry about it. Let me give you a piece of trivia. There was a famous economist at Rutgers, George Fernley, and I remember one time he said to me in the 70s, he says, Kurt, someday we're gonna have more bedrooms than people. And he thought he was kidding. He didn't think we'd ever reach that. We reached that a long time ago. It's the financialization of housing. We made it an investment. My wife and I are the two of us, and we actually share a bedroom. We still like each other, yeah. So, but we have a 4-bedroom home. Beautiful old home, adjacent to the city park, right next to downtown, the whole neighborhood, all that stuff. Oh, we have 3 bedrooms that aren't used 99% of the time. Is that a good use of housing stock in the United States? No, probably not. But the reality of it is, it's in our interest to stay there and have that asset grow in value. And there's my part of the problem. All right?
How does people having 1, 2, 3 homes, like my brother does, how does that affect the statistics?
And we do monitor that separately. I didn't include it as a separate line item. When we talk about the vacant units, we have right now, right at 14 million vacant units in the United States. Just to give you a quick way to figure out what is 14 million, if we had the normal 9% vacancy across the board in the United States, that number would come down to be enough housing to house every household in 2 average-sized states. So, state of Missouri, here's your kind of American average, right? We have enough vacant surplus vacant, not what we need, but beyond what we need. We could burn down all of Missouri, and those people would only fill up half of all the homes remaining. All right? So, therein lies the problem. Again, this is back to the financialization. I'm guessing your brother is a pretty smart investor. He doesn't go out and buy homes just because, hey, I want to lose money on it. He's making money on those homes.
But are all 3 of his homes considered occupied?
No, only one is considered
And
occupied,
so the other 2,
or
he's
considered
not in
seasonal.
right now.
Yeah.
Are-
If he rents them out, they're
Supposedly
kept.
if when he doesn't, if
Yeah.
supposedly they were.
No, they are considered seasonal, all right? Now, so you're aware, the Census Bureau is under a lot of fire about the way it's counting seasonal. I think we all know we've got a lot of vacation rentals by owners, all. They are supposed to be reported under short-term rentals seasonal. But what we're finding, especially when you get down to the Florida coast especially, which is of course replete with these units, a lot of the landlords are saying, no, this is a rental. Partly it's to keep them legal with local ordinances, but also partly they don't view them as seasonal. You know, they rent them out 365, so the count on the seasonal is not as good as it used to be. The other one, again, it's lumped into the total vacant units that we're not showing. We always have this other category, vacant for rent, vacant for sale, seasonal, this other thing. There's always gonna be some other probate, that kind of stuff. But it's doubled since the housing bubble, all right? And that is a bad thing. That means we've got literally millions of units sitting off the market. We can't find out much about the condition of those units, but we have good reason to believe that they are actually in good shape and it's wasted stock. But unfortunately, the market is not encouraging them to get them back, get them back in. All right, let's get off of that. I just want to go through quickly a little update. This piece gives us the last 4 years. It's a slightly different data set. It's called the American Community Survey. Some of you may have been recipients of the American Community. They go out and they survey every urban county in the United States, 1% every year. They pool those data over 5 years to make sure we don't get any true ball spikes. Essentially what they say is post-pandemic, 2020 to 2024, population growth has already fallen to 0.6. Well, we knew that. We knew the birth rate was falling almost immediately. The pandemic hit and birth rate fell. We haven't seen, as another piece of demographic trivia, we haven't seen that big a fall in birth rate since Kennedy's assassination. That's what really turned off birth rates. The housing units are growing at a slower rate at 0.8%. Households are still growing at 1%, but that is drawing down the vacant inventory. The reason that worries us a little bit, well, the construction halted on single family during the pandemic, labor problems, supply chain problems, so forth. But we thought it would be under a couple of years for it to rebound. This is now 2025. We're not back yet on single family homes. Is it the depressed effect of the high mortgages? Maybe, but we don't know for sure. So I'm not gonna say everything is hunky-dory, we are still continuing to have households grow faster than the stock, grow faster than the population, but now we're drawing down that inventory. Well, I've already told you about the various years. I want to get past all this and get to the quick stuff on, all right, if we don't have a shortage, what's the problem? Well, many things influence prices. And the key thing I'm going to show you is that we have a mismatch between the distribution, prices and incomes. Little bar chart here. The Census Bureau divides incomes up in 11 categories. These are the 11. This is only renter households in the United States. If you look closely, we have a somewhat normal distribution here. It peaks in the $50,000 to $75,000 range. Basically, that's your kind of modal point of the renter population. But if you look down here, you can kind of make out another distribution. That's the chronically poor. They're always part of us. The safety net system isn't as strong as it should be. We've got quite a few people in America who live in that category. There's the rental units by price category appropriate to them. If we assume every household should spend 30%, what's worth, I'll make the PowerPoint available, so, if anybody wants that. In an ideal world, you'd have the number of units in each income and price category about 190% of the number of households, right? There's the two of them together. You can see pretty quickly, we've got some mismatches. The submarkets are saturated in the 875 to, 2,500 rent in the United States. Now, I want you to notice, because this is where you're gonna find that Bozeman varies. At the upper income area, these are renters by choice. You don't have money to buy a home, they just choose not to. I've met a lot of people, they just don't like mowing a lawn. I mean, they so detest it, like God, they're gonna rent, that's fine. But they have choice. But remember, they also have choice to rent a unit down here. And then when housing economists talk about availability, that's the issue. What is the market penetration of each submarket by households whose income is high enough that they, by consuming a unit, they're taking one away from a household of a lower income group. All right? There we go. Notice that, well, I didn't mention that the US market 625 to 875, that's the only one that's actually balanced correctly. Above that is saturated, below that is in short supply. Tell somebody who's only making $20,000 a year that the nation has a surplus of housing. They're gonna scoff at you, of course, and they should, because there's no surplus at their end, all right? So, therein lies our biggest problem. What does it mean when a market behaves this way? It means the developers can't enter into the lower price markets and make money. But as a practical matter, they have to build a market in the middle, which is already saturated, not serving the households that this is. It means the people who are not served in these markets must consume at a higher level. As a practical matter, what that means is they're going to spend more than 30% of their income on housing. Other piece of trivia, 30% is the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development's legal definition of a housing cost hardship. You spend more than 30% of income on housing, you're suffering a hardship, or simply an affordability problem. All right? Just so you're aware, more than half of all renters in the United States suffer a high housing cost burden. The average rental cost burden is now north of 30%. All right, you guys are all accomplished housing economists now, so I'll go straight to the counterpart one for the homeowner. And you will notice there's very small but relatively well-balanced markets for low-priced homes. You were asking who was asking the mobile homes? I'm not supposed to say that anymore. The manufactured housing is in those categories. But again, if you ask a realtor, how many units are out there available below 100,000? Well, no realtor is going to mess with a house at that level. Those are sold by the tear-off sheets at the laundromat. You know, that's how that market operates. So you look at the higher end, the market really only begins entry level price at about 200,000. And notice, you have a little bit of a surplus between value, but it's working well. Here's the part though that is a little bit odd. Again, note this because when we get to Bozeman, which we'll do in just a second, we've got at the upper end a lot of people who choose to rent less own a lower value home than they can afford. So like a lot of economists complain about the financialization of housing and how our tax laws encourage this, but as a practical matter, we would see a reversal of that if it was too great a problem. Okay? So let's see what this means for Bozeman. Now that you know everything, same questions. Is there a shortage? Is there a mismatch? Way too many numbers again, but you know what we're looking for. What we're looking for is the growth in population. The U.S. has grown by 0.9, you're growing at 3.0. Does that come as a surprise to anybody that you're growing at over 3 times the rate of the U.S.? Look at those mountains outside. I was telling Nathan, I've spoken in a lot of library community rooms, but I don't think I've ever had that. We have a nice library in my hometown, but when we look out on what is the backside of the AT&T building, it's nuts. All right, you've got a very strong community. At the 3.0% growth, notice that the households are forming at 3.3%. They can't form if the housing stock isn't there. So the units have been growing at an even faster 3.4%. Your inventory of vacant units is getting larger. Okay? I didn't do this for on the national side, but I don't think this is going to come in and really surprise you. Over the time period of 20 to 2023, the 2024 data for Gallatin County aren't ready yet, so I had to stop at 2023. I looked up the CPI chain where that it's grown by 2.5% per year. So if prices were staying level with inflation, they grow at 2.5%. If you look at gross rents, they've grown by 4.8. If you look at housing prices, grown by 6.7. Double, triple the rate of inflation almost, right? But remember that incomes are the big push factor on this. You can't sell the unit, can't rent the apartment if in fact the price is too high. And that's the problem they're going to run into here because incomes are up, no doubt about it. Renters are up 4.6. Remember, on a lower base, renter incomes typically are about 1/2 of the average income of a homeowner. 6.7 compared to 3.6% growth. You guys may be attracting a lot of rich retirees to come to beautiful Bozeman. I wouldn't be surprised if that's what's behind it. But as a practical matter, that's gotta warn you that the numbers are getting out of sync. So let's shift to the, come on, you can do it. There we go. Here's the rental analysis for Bozeman. I don't think it comes as any surprise because you've got saturation in the markets in the 1250 to 2500. The reason I warn you, we'll talk about in just a minute, some of the problems of the low-income housing tax credit program. What I worry about with it is, while it's a good program, it tends to produce units here. Who's in need? People down here. So therein lies, when you create local responses to these things, that you need to worry about that. Yes, ma'am?
I might have missed this if you said it earlier, but does the income include unearned income as well?
It's the census definition, and no. So in other words, the census does not include safety net payments. Everybody has griped about the problems of alimony and those things. If the respondent household chooses to report it, it's counted. If they don't report it, it's not counted. Nobody comes back and says, gee, the court says you're counted. So all these numbers have some error in them. And just, again, to alert to the biggest problems is underreporting down at this level. There may be money coming in from a couple of side jobs that, let's just say they're paid in cash to work at the car wash, and that money never gets reported. Those things happen. It's like, does it throw this overall problem off? Not really. So in Bozeman, you're basically in the same problem of people who are well off and can afford units up here, at least through 2023, they're not showing. All right? Saturated here, shortage down below. One area where you're especially different than the US, how if I hit the right button, here's your ownership market. Recall that at the upper end in the United States, we had more households than units in each of these two categories. I have always avoided the word gentrification because it's a value-laden word. Somebody is building for an income spectrum that doesn't seem to exist here or at least show up in the census numbers.
You know, a lot of us have had homes that appreciated. Like my home is worth way more than like I could buy it for, so I would fit in some of those numbers.
Yeah, no, my wife and I are the same thing. We could afford a house. We got the nicest neighborhood in the state of Kansas,
But I'm saying it's not necessarily homes that are being built, but homes that have appreciated in value. So we have a lot of more than $600,000 homes in Bozeman, but it's old homes that have gotten that expensive.
yeah, and understand, this is a synopsis of it, but the homes that are coming online seem to be at the upper price ranges. And that is like what I would worry about. So anyway, what's the overall conclusion?
What was our vacancy rate? Because I thought in yours it was like 7%, which I thought was lower than you were saying was.
Well, these are growth in the vacancy rate, let's see.
The 17, 15 over the 24, 8.
Yeah, and you will notice also, this is one I picked, because I have error checkers. The American Community Survey published the same number 2 years. You know how often that happens in real life? Okay, yeah, well, it's these poor underpaid people sitting in the basement of offices in Silver Spring, Maryland are producing these numbers, and thank goodness they're willing to do it. So I don't think I trust that one completely, but according to this, you've got, and have had for the last several years, you've had something in the order of 1,800 vacant units.
But I mean, as a percentage there.
Yes, I'm afraid I
It's
didn't.
7%, which is, I mean, I guess that's how I think about a shortage, is more like what, how much availability is there?
Well, and that, again, that's what I said, in terms of an ideal setting, in a rental market, you want renters, the rental rates to stay in the 5 to 7%. Above that is bad, below that is bad, all right?
Well, you were saying 9 before, and
Yeah.
Yeah, that's enough.
Yeah. Anyway, let me first, because I want to get to the discussion of the policies. What remedies are available for Bozeman? I'll start with the bottom up. If we look for what works, if I just say what programs have the best impact on housing affordability, it's the minimum wage. If you raise everybody, the minimum wage worker to $20 an hour, $40,000 a year, it is amazing. Housing affordability problems just start to go away at 40,000.
Can we see the previous slide one more time? I don't think we got to make it to the end of that one.
Oh, sorry.
No, I'm sorry, thank you.
But basically, what we have, I'm just summarizing what we already, there is no shortage of housing overall, but there is a mismatch in prices and incomes. That is our problem in America. It's also Fort Worth is your problem right here in Bozeman. You have a rather different version of that problem given the high-end entry prices that you have. Some of the rental units are very high priced. Some of the new housing units are high priced. To what extent that is the financialization, to what extent that is high income retired, I don't have the data to sort that out. Each of those will have a component of it. But for renters, as you might imagine, there's problems at the bottom end. And on the owners, I would be nervous about the high price at which units are coming into the market. They're extremely high. All right. In terms of solutions, Alex and I have put together a couple of papers that made the argument for raising the minimum wage. This can really only happen at the federal level. I live in the Kansas City area. The state of Missouri has a much more generous minimum wage. But if you've ever been to Kansas City, you know we have a road called State Line Boulevard. Northbound, you're in Missouri. Southbound, you're in Kansas. You've got a firm that says, hey, the minimum wage in Missouri is $14 an hour. And across the street, you've got the state of Kansas with virtually no minimum wage except the federal level, which is $7.50, I think, something like that. You're an employer and you want to cut your labor costs, just move to the Kansas side. So we can't have those kind of interjurisdictional competitions. We need the federal government to realize that raising the minimum wage works. How do we know it works? Australia did this about a decade ago. Nobody could make less than the equivalent of about $30,000 a year. All right? That was a big shock. They had McDonald's over there just like we do. Suddenly McDonald's had to pay $30,000 to the people working behind the cash register and flipping burgers. They also did away with tips at the same time. Have you heard about Australia sinking into the ocean? No. In fact, its economy has survived quite well, and by that supercharged safety net, things are working very, very well. Or you had your hand up. All right. But now let's go into more housing normal solutions. What I want to describe to you is an array of programs with federal government funds that can come to Bozeman, and importantly, at no cost to Bozeman. They're funded by the federal taxpayer. God bless them, but they're paying for that. You should make sure that you avail yourself of these programs. The biggest one is the low-income housing tax credit program. You are using it some here, but what I would suggest is that the program by itself serves too high an income segment. you want it to be serving the middle and the lower end. And there'll be also another whole long lecture, but the value of mixed income. I can summarize it in one quick line. Concentrating poverty in a single building isn't good for the household, it isn't good for the building, and it isn't good for the surrounding neighborhood. We haven't built public housing since Clinton was president. All of what we're building now is mixed income. There are some exceptions, special needs populations and so forth. But mixed income is the way we want to go. A certain percentage will be extremely low income, another percentage would be low income, the next group would be market rate. The low income housing tax credit program, the developers make the most money by putting 100% of the units in an apartment complex as low income tax credit units, serving the least worst off of the poor. Bozeman can lean in on that process. It's important for winning those tax credits that you have the support of the community. The community can start to say, we want our approval for this development. We want to see you work a partnership with organizations that will help you make mixed income housing. It's unfortunate you do not have a housing authority. Housing authorities are excellent at this. Not for owning and operating public housing. That's for the older legacy one. The big job for housing authorities today is running the Housing Choice Voucher Program and administering a second one called the project-based voucher. Of the total dollars allocated to every housing authority, usually they're, in a 1 year, they're allocated out to individual households, take a voucher to the landlord, say, I want to rent this unit, tenant pays 30%, the voucher pays the difference between the tenant's 30% contribution to rent. The housing authority has the option to take a percentage of its annual allocation of voucher money, and nail it from the developer and say, do a deal with this. You deal with this, and we're going to help you put that together. You'll earn the tax credits on the low and moderate income units. We'll help you resolve your need to assemble equity to make this deal work. You can go to the bank and borrow against the money you don't get from selling the tax credit. You get a nice chunk of change from taking these tax credits and selling them, usually to banks. Bank of America is overwhelmingly the biggest buyer of tax credits. At any rate, the city needs to take the lead on those. The developer, bless their heart, they're going to take the path of least resistance. I used to be a developer, would make more money taking the easy road, less money taking the hard road. Well, if the easy road is taken away from you, you figure out how to make money on the hard road. Okay?
There you go.
I'll give you one more because it's available to you, and I don't believe it is used on the home ownership side. There's a thing called private activity bonds. Every year, the United States taxpayer says, you, the people of Montana, you can have this amount of dollars. You can issue on Wall Street, sell these bonds. You can then loan that money to any private entity that does whatever Montana declares to be a public service. Ain't hard to get people to agree that building affordable housing is a public service. Those private activity bonds can be either used to develop multifamily housing, or they can actually be made into individual loans to low-income, first-time home buyers. And the great advantage is they can be high loan-to-value loans. Why is that important? The typical renter who wants desperately to own a home, they're already paying monthly the amount of money that it would cost to buy the home. Because what's the barrier? A damn down payment. You know, you're trying to, you know, have a hard time making ends meet. And somebody says to you, congratulations, 30,000 down, we can get you. Where are you going to come up with $30,000, right? But these private activity bonds, and I told somebody at I said, you know, I helped get a woman who was a cashier at a local grocery grocery store, single mom kid, got her into a home costing her less per month than she was paying in her rent before. And of course, her rent was going up every year. The more, now obviously, property tax and insurance goes up some, but the mortgage stays the same. And very importantly, 18 years later, she's got equity in that home. Where a kid needs to go to college, goes to the bank and says, I need a college loan for my kid, oh, and here's the equity in my home. Wealth transfer like that is important. Yes, sir.
I've never heard of the the last thing.
Private activity bonds.
Private activity bonds, so it's a little overhead. Housing
No, it's
authorities.
not. It's not fine.
Housing authorities, I have heard of. And I'm not sure if there are any city or county commissioners here, but I did ask a county commissioner whether a housing authority is a viable option for us. And their response was, it's just too hard for us to do this in Montana. Do you know anything about that? Because I have no clue. What obstacles?
Well, it's embarrassing for me to come here and disagree with whatever they said. The simple fact is, housing authorities will need a tiny amount of startup money. Once they get going, in those transfers to the housing authority, it will be an 8% administrative fee. The housing authority figures out how to run it. Look, housing authorities aren't big. They're usually only 2-3 people. But that 8% figure is usually enough to cover the salaries on those people.
Well, I guess I'll start looking into it. We should start looking into it. I don't know why
I'm not saying Montana isn't necessarily the place where people want to go and, wow, this is the place to take out a career in affordable housing. But as a practical matter, I mean, look at that. You think you're going to have trouble attracting talent to this town? You're not going to have any trouble. This could be a great place, isn't it?
I have a question in response to that, and then I ask everyone. The question in response is, can states levy anything to stop housing authorities from being Is that a problem?
You cannot have a housing authority without the blessing of essentially the housing authority is a branch of local government. So if they don't bless it, it ain't gonna happen. There are a few alternatives I've seen in communities where nonprofits start up, but they cannot avail themselves of the kind of resources that are available to a public housing authority.
And the second question, I'm working environmental policy, and everyone's talking about this abundance theory right now, and I'm very frustrated by it, but I'm also very curious because I think it comes pretty counter to the whole presentation that you gave us.
Yes,
And
it
I'm
is.
curious what your perspective on it is and how you can maybe get us thinking critically about it, since it seems to be all over the media.
Let me give you the quick synopsis of the book. Ezra Klein, very famous writer for the New York Times. I can't think of the name of his co-writer, but it's basically Ezra Klein that put this together. And the argument goes this way, that we have such an abundance of resources that we have made it nigh on to impossible to use. And he is right at a certain level. I was lucky enough to have my master's thesis advisor with Bernie Frieden, very famous professor at MIT, and he wrote a book called The Environmental Protection Hustle. And he loved me because before I'd even read a draft of his book, I told him a story about a job I had in California. Santa Cruz County, I was building houses, sort of as an architect, and building housing, supervising construction, small scale operation. But the company was put out of business by environmental regulation. The environmental regulation was not carefully designed. It was excessively designed to stop development. Everybody loved Santa Cruz Mountains the way it was the day they moved in. And they didn't want one more person to change it. So they put my company out of business. And, so I took out a loan, went back to college, and, what you need does that. The argument that Ezra Klein is making is that zoning and development controls nationwide have become that system that we so over-regulate that what? We're creating a shortage of housing. Ezra's one of the brightest people on the planet. Remembers everything he's ever read. I mean, he's one of those kind of brains. The numbers I've shown you tonight say Ezra is wrong. It's that simple. If we are building housing units faster than we are growing population, the regulatory constraints can't be that great. Doesn't mean they aren't great in some respects. Alex Schwartz's apartment building, 12-story building, you know, I asked Alex exactly what his apartment was worth. It's probably worth a couple of million now. But if they could tear down that building, 12 stories, and build 36 stories, my God, they'd make a ton, right? Why don't they do it? The regulations won't allow that building to be torn down and a new one built. In that regard, Ezra Klein is correct that the zoning prevents construction in some areas. But here's what's wrong with Ezra's calculations. He says, because the zoning stops that construction, that's why we have a shortage. That's not how it works. We have a shortage in the Upper West Side. If you wanted to find an apartment, I'm not kidding, this happens. An ambulance goes driving through the neighborhood, people run after the ambulance. If somebody dies in the apartment, they want to be the first one there to try to get the apartment. That's how sought after the Upper West Side. It is crazy. But it assumes that the unit isn't built somewhere else. Ooh, that assumption's all wrong. New York City has an ultra-tight housing market. Greater New York area, Northeast New Jersey, Long Island, all of that. Upstate New York into the Nyack and that area. That's the metropolitan area. The number of units is growing faster than the rate of population and faster than the household formation. Now, if somebody really wants to live in the Upper West Side, how do you think they're going to feel when you say, hey, there's an apartment waiting for you in New Jersey? That's not what they want. And I think Ezra missed that point, that we've got zoning simply displaces housing. It provides for a lot of exclusionary housing. I am a great supporter of getting rid of single-family zoning and allowing greater density. You've heard my spiel for mixed income. If you've got a neighborhood that is exclusively single-family, then you ain't going to build mixed income there. But if a certain amount of more dense housing is available and it's mixed income and enhances the values of the neighborhood, not disturbs them, then in fact, they can be a very good thing. But to think that zoning, and that this is a very popular idea in planning today, wrong, but it's a very popular fad notion, zoning depresses housing construction as a whole. It only causes it to locate somewhere else. Now, in New York City, that could be all the way out in New Jersey. I live in the real world. I live in Kansas City. Most metropolitan areas are like Kansas City. Exclusionary zoning, okay. We've got 200 communities that make up the entire metropolitan Kansas City. Kansas City, Missouri certainly isn't exclusionary. They're trying to get I'm native of Kansas City, Kansas. It's so poor, the city will sell you a house for $1. The downside of it is you gotta live in that house for 7 years. But there are little communities, Patrick Holmes lives in one, everybody lives there, multi-millionaires. That's exclusionary zoning to the degree. It doesn't mean that too few units were built overall. Kansas City has more than enough housing. If anything, right now, the rental housing is in big surplus. For whatever reason, a whole lot of stuff being built all at once. It's going to take some time for that to come down. Yeah.
I'm interested in the scale that's possible with this light tech, controlling the light tech distribution. If you go back to graph of the shortage in Bozeman at that tail end. Get outlined. So if, for example, if you guys hypothesize we get a housing authority says that there's this constraint that the developer must have enough units that are in that lower end, is this viable scale for a LIHTC solution enough to reduce the gap between the blue and the red in that lower scale?
A single development, no. But if you make mixed income housing the way you gain the favor of the citizenry of Bozeman, and that carries on for years, yes, it can be a sufficient scale to solve. I mean, let's look at rental units in the 900 to 1250, and that's where tax credit properties are, well, actually, it's coming in here a little higher. So you go into both of those. But you look across, you're under 2,000 households in that income category, and you've got about 2,500 units. Right? So your shortfall is measured in the hundreds. Typical apartment development, 70 to 100 units is probably the most common size. It is the most common size for LIHTC property. I say the difficulty is the developers want to build 100% LIHTC units. You really don't want that. You want them in an ideal setting, something like a 20-20-60. 20% extremely low income, 20% low income, 60% market rate. I've even seen communities do 3 levels of low income. You know, these things are all possible, no right or wrong to it. The developers, of course, will immediately throw up their hands and say, oh, it can't be done. Oh, it can be done. It's being done all over America, but it won't happen unless the community takes the lead. The developers will take the path of least resistance.
So in those mixed income model, is it typical that the product types are different and reflective of the price, or do you tend to see the cost get shifted to the market rate units to subsidize the lower rates?
Now, you have to guard against there being any distinction between the units. You know, like the kid Alex with New York, but there was a famous building on the west side, and they don't mix income. The people who occupy the low-income housing tax credit units, you know, everything's carved down to get in, right? They could only get in one entrance of the building. The state had to take the developer to court and say, this isn't what you promised, and boy, they slapped him down.
I mean, like square footage wise, like scaling it up or down?
Again, that's part of the community saying, here's what we need. If given the choice, the developer will make studio apartments out of the affordable. You don't want that. If your need, as I suspect it is for 2-bedroom apartments, you got a single mom working as a cashier at the grocery store. You don't want her boy staying, I mean, he needs his own room, she needs her own room. You know? So you're gonna have to look at that mix. That means you need a good, savvy housing officer working for the city of Bozeman, takes the lead on this stuff, and basically the way it works is the city sends out RFPs, saying developers, come to us with proposals, and you lay out the bullet points of, we expect it to be in this range of units, we have no less than this mix by income. We want the units distributed by size exactly the same across the 3 strata. So
Just as a comment, so we had inclusionary zoning, and one of the main reasons the state legislature said they did away with it was the cost shift principle, that you're just shifting the cost onto the market rate, and then what you're inadvertently doing is almost inflating the market rate cost.
You really can't inflate market rate costs. They are where they are because the demand is bidding for those units.
So you're saying a subsidy is what?
I'm saying that just the narrow notion that the market rate units have pulled up prices up. That's not how the markets work, right? But what I would suggest to you is that inclusionary zoning can work. That same concept can be executed through a variety of means. I understand that you're at the state. The Director of Community Development of Nashville is a former student of mine, and exactly the same thing happened to him. They built a couple of mixed income properties. The developers then went to the state legislature, made a few significant campaign contributions, bought a couple of committees, got a prohibition on inclusionary zoning. All right, you're smart people, you know, you can find other mechanisms to do that. I think it's too bad. We got same, I live in Lawrence, Kansas, we had an inclusionary zoning, state of Kansas, got rid of it. I like to tell a little story. I got to testify in front of Orrin Hatch's finance committee trying to talk about reforms for the low-income housing tax credit. They lined up mortgage lenders on one side of me and home builders on the other side to say, the guy with the mustaches all along. I knew they were lying. The problem is we've got a bunch of senators, and you're not actually speaking to senators. You're speaking to their staffers and hoping the staffers will read your written testimony because they were dead wrong. But unfortunately, politics is the way it is. Members of legislators look to see who's making contributions. If the Home Builders Association is making large contributions, they're going to read the briefing papers they send. And a good friend of mine is actually two friends of mine are legislators in the state of Kansas. And I have to constantly talk them through the way to think about these briefing papers. You know, one's a barber and one's an architect. The architect, she knows a little more about the development process, but they have to learn. So you need to do your homework and fight back on these things. There are a lot of tools that are still available to vote. All right, let's go with one more. How's that?
I'm wondering how you roll back the impact of large corporations who control whether it's the rental market or come in and buy up large swaths of homes that are for sale and then control that market.
If there's a solution for that problem, I don't know. But yeah, a good friend of mine, but he's retired from Georgia. Atlanta has a huge problem in this area. And they're trying to find legal ways at the county level, they're looking at this. Can a county prohibit types of ownership? And apparently the Georgia Constitution does not permit that. I don't know what future, I'm not an attorney, so I don't know, but they are struggling. My biggest fear is there's going to come a day when those funds that are buying all these properties are going to make a competitive return like that. They'll start selling those properties, and that could be a train wreck. We really don't want to see that train wreck. That's probably everything I know now about that topic, which is not enough incomplete answer.
Thank you very much.
Thank you guys for having me. It's great.